Well, beautiful. Thank you, everybody, for sharing. And what we're going to do now is sit for about 15 minutes. You can get comfortable. However you'd like to sit is good. I always like to encourage upright, but just relaxed, and anything that feels good for you. And we're going to be practicing with mindfulness of the mind. And so a central part of that is kind of just allowing whatever's coming up to arise and pass and just being aware of it. So we're not going for perfectly concentrated mind state, but instead just allowing the thoughts, the feelings, whatever's arising, and really noticing what's happening, particularly in the mind. And then also noticing that quality of awareness underneath it that is just open and spacious and, kind of a reliable refuge. So you can close your eyes if that feels good, or just rest your gaze on the ground in front of you. And we'll begin and end with the sound of the bell. So if it feels supportive, you can start with a few longer, slower, deeper breaths just to help the body slow down and to help the mind arrive in the body. Same way that the body's resting on the cushion, allowing the mind to rest in the body. And then as you feel ready, letting go of any control over the breath and trusting in the body's wisdom to breathe however it needs to breathe. And setting intention, so setting down having to be anyone, having to go anywhere, having to do anything. Instead, just tuning into this body as it is, and this mind and heart as they are. What would it feel like to set down any of the pressures that the mind sometimes likes to bring into these things? Having to be a meditator, or having to be focused, just noticing any of that energy. And just releasing any holding or grasping to expectations. And really landing on that rhythm of the breath. Maybe noticing where it's most predominant. And then softening through the body. So starting at the top of the head, noticing the forehead, the eyes. Letting the eyes relax in the sockets. And similarly, the brain, the mind, relaxing from the inside out. And then also the jaw, the mouth. Noticing if there's any holding. And scanning down through the shoulders. And letting the shoulder blades come together, releasing the arms, the hands. Noticing what that feels like to not have to do anything with the hands, but just allowing them to rest wherever they are. Noticing that sense of contact. And also softening through the emotional body, so the heart, the chest, stomach, and the belly. Sometimes there can be a lot of defensive, protective patterns in the muscles here. So with each out-breath, to the best of your ability, just releasing any of that holding, which can in turn allow the body to breathe a bit easier. especially into the lower belly. Sometimes the breath doesn't make it down there, so not forcing anything, just softening. Noticing as you scan down through the lower belly into the legs, feeling the contact, the sit bones on the cushion or the chair. And then feeling the weight of the legs, upper legs softening down through the knees and the lower legs, all the way down through the feet. And with each out breath, just visualizing that any remaining stress or tension is being carried away with each out breath down through the legs, down through the feet, into the earth. And bringing the awareness to the whole body, top of the head, all the way to the bottom of the feet. And just really deeply settling into this rhythm of the breath. And noticing what starts to get uncovered in this practice, which is the simple present moment awareness. And call it mindfulness. But recognizing it not as something that you have to do, but something that's already happening through you, and it just needs to be recognized. And as you stay with the breath and stay rooted in this awareness, really opening and turning towards the mind. Noticing any thought that arises. Just with non-judgment and allowing it to pass. And it's okay if the thought takes us for a ride. Just recognizing that. Returning. Again and again, this word sati for mindfulness means to remember. And as thoughts and emotions arise, pass, sensations arise and pass, also tuning into the absence. As busy as the mind can be, surely there are gaps and pauses. So the practice here is not to achieve a particular mind state, but to simply be aware of whatever is arising. And what this can do is kind of short circuit the striving energy of the mind. It's always trying to accomplish something or get it right. You can just notice that. Mind is striving. There's this kind of coolness and equanimity in this kind of a practice. And I wanted to share some words by a great Tibetan master, Dilgo Khyentse. He said, what we normally call the mind is the deluded mind, a turbulent vortex of thoughts whipped up by attachment, anger, and ignorance. And this mind, unlike enlightened awareness, is always being carried away by one delusion after another, triggered by such circumstances as an unexpected meeting with an enemy or a friend. And unless they are immediately overpowered with the proper antidote, they quickly take root and proliferate, reinforcing the habitual predominance of hatred or attachment in the mind and adding more and more karmic patterns. Yet, however strong these thoughts may seem, they are just thoughts and will eventually dissolve back into emptiness. Once you recognize the intrinsic nature of the mind, these thoughts that seem to appear and disappear all the time can no longer fool you. Whenever a thought develops, recognize it as being empty. That thought will immediately lose its compelling power and will not generate attachment and hatred. And once attachment and hatred are gone, realization of the perfectly pure Dharma will unfold naturally from within. So giving yourself this last minute, to take in a sense of gratitude, appreciation for simply being here and showing up and dedicating some time to practice. And sharing the merit, may any benefits or goodness of this practice be shared with those we know, those we don't know, and with all living beings. May all beings be free. So as always, thank you for your practice. And I like to encourage just a continuity of that mindfulness that's been practiced, right? Just noticing, as I'll share some thoughts and we'll move into a discussion, the capacity for this continuity of presence of mind. So today we're going to be continuing this exploration of mindfulness of the mind. Really, I was thinking about this as kind of a lifelong practice that's unfolding quietly within the mind. And the Buddha taught that it's in this mind or in this heart where freedom happens. So not in the afterlife, but here and now, in the present. And I think it's important to discuss what is the mind, though, because it's kind of a big word. And the word that's used in Pali in the sutta we're kind of working through here, the Satipatthana Sutta, is chitta, which is often translated as heart mind or even awareness itself, so that which knows. So rather than the contents of the mind, the emotions, but just that simple, bare knowing. And the Buddha taught that it's this awareness that becomes liberated through practice. And freed from what? Freed from attachment and craving and aversion and delusion. So in this third foundation of mindfulness, the Buddha teaches really directly and simply how to free the mind. Through insight, observing the impermanent nature of the mind, the not-self aspects of it, and the unsatisfying nature of trying to create a self out of it. And through noticing the presence and the absence of these mental states really being sharp. And then ultimately also using this as a lifelong practice every day, not just in meditation, but in daily life. So that's what I want to explore today. And that's something we really always try to focus on here at Wild Heart, is really just bringing this into daily life. How does this mean? So one of the most obvious experiences when you sit down and observe the mind is change. It can be day to day, moment to moment. The human mind, it's evolved to be highly malleable and adaptive and changeable, which is great. And it can be very disorienting at times. I don't know if you've ever had a day like that where it feels like you've been through every possible mind state that the human mind can create in a single day. So coming to terms with this constant flux or change is crucial for a path of liberation, of freedom. And so this was really central to the Buddha's experience. He saw this impermanence in his direct experience, sitting down, meditating, watching the mind. And he had this breakthrough that there's no fixed or lasting me in this mind. There are volitions, there are thoughts, there are emotions, but it's constantly changing. And so at the time of the Buddha, it was a kind of a trendy spiritual quest was to uncover the true self. This was in line with kind of some Vedic scriptures at the time. I shouldn't say trendy. This is it was cool at the time to be exploring. Yeah. And so he was, the Buddhist teachings are very kind of like jabbing back at a lot of stuff that was around at the time. And so what he saw in his own experience, he's like, there's no actual, real, ultimate self. How can you call it an ultimate self if that mind is constantly changing and adapting and malleable? So when he sat down and looked at his mind, he saw volition, there's action, there's choice, there's a ton of nonsense. How can this be really me? And it's so interdependent with the wider world. And because the mind is impermanent and there is no lasting me, it's unsatisfying or stressful to try to identify with this thing that is constantly changing and not really me. So this is what the Buddha referred to as the 3 marks of insight. Anicca, impermanence or change. Anatta, not self. And dukkha, suffering or unsatisfactoriness. And so his teaching was, instead of trying to find some ultimate self, sit down and watch what's happening in your mind. This is one of the reasons I always love Buddhist teachings. It brings it back to such simple and direct pointings. Just watch and observe the thoughts, the emotions, all the passing phenomena, and something beautiful will arise. This process of insight will arise. And so, we have modern psychology and so many applications of this in the world, one of which is mindfulness-based cognitive therapy. And they call this decentering. This is kind of like a modern psychology language for it, where you, instead of saying, I'm anxious about X, Y, or Z, you reframe it to, okay, there goes anxiety, right? It moves from content to process. So instead of being caught up in the content of the anxiety, just noticing this is just another process that's unfolding. And so the Buddha taught to notice what the mind is doing, especially the unwholesome states. This is something Olivia talked about a lot last week. Craving, aversion, delusion, confusion, and just being aware of those things in and of itself starts to create some space from them. But he also taught to notice when they're absent. So just noticing in your own experience, what does that feel like when there's space? Between the craving, between the aversion, when there's that gap in the mind. So to pay attention to when these mind states are there and when they're not there. And it's interesting because he's not saying to, craving, get rid of craving, get rid of aversion, but instead it's just saying, watch where they're there, watch when they're not there. And what that process does is it starts to kind of short circuit that habitual pattern of trying to fixate or trying to get things just right. So there's a coolness to this style of practice. There's a sense of balance and equanimity, and it's like, bring it. Whatever comes up, it's okay. And this part of the sutta also starts to point to this deep potential for freedom in the heart. So it says, the Buddha, as he goes on in this section, encourages to notice when the mind is concentrated or when it's not concentrated. He's not saying, yell at yourself when it's not concentrated. Just notice. He also said to notice when it's contracted or expansive. And I love the Pali word for this. It's chitta, mahagata chitta. That means an expansive or exalted mind. So noticing when your chitta is mahagata. And he also says liberated or not liberated. Okay, noticing when the mind is feeling quite free or when it's not, when it's feeling really trapped. That's the vimutta citta, the liberated mind. So really what it boils down to is kind of noticing when the mind is free, noticing when the mind is trapped, and becoming familiar with it so the mind naturally starts to become more aware. Okay, this is suffering. I know this. I've seen it so many times. This is peace. I know what this feels like because I'm familiar with it, because I've sat and I've practiced with it. And so the Buddha taught that it's possible, if practice like this, there's this potential for liberation to arise on its own. And so how to bring this kind of deep and profound sounding practices into daily life. And I kind of came up with like a 3-step practical check-in practice. So starting by just checking in, noticing what's happening in the mind, noting, which is something we've talked about a lot in this group, noting the mind state, and then also noticing the absence of mind state. Wow, there's that quiet kind of observation of knowing when the mind is free or open. So for checking in, finding moments in the day to tune in and check in with the mind. This is something I try to do when I get in my car, something I do when I get home, maybe before I'm about to have a client or conversation, taking a moment to just tune in and making that a really regular practice, not just when we sit on the cushion or intentionally meditation, but in daily life. And it can also be an alternative to checking out, which is something my mind likes to do a lot. I was thinking about it. I was like, what if I just, in 1 week, replaced half the times I just picked up my phone to check out with just checking in with myself, right? Like, how radically different would my week be? And then the next step I was suggesting is noting. So after you're checking in, noting, okay, there's anger here. There's some fear here. There's, maybe some peace here, whatever it is that's present. And the encouragement is to remove the I from it. So rather than I'm angry or I'm anxious, just, okay, this is anger is arising. Anxiety is arising. Again, it just provides a little space and removes some of the identification from it. Another kind of mindfulness-based therapy act, acceptance and commitment therapy, they call this cognitive diffusion, where you remove the I. And the idea being it can create less blame, right? It's like, here I go again, I'm doing this thing. Instead of just being like, okay, this thing is arising again. It starts to, again, take that identification out of the process. Not saying there's no responsibility, but creates a little less grasping. And then the last thing that I think can be really helpful is something I've really been trying to lean into myself, is just noticing the space in the mind. And I think this is really important because there's so much happening in a day of a modern human. Taking in so much information, taking in so much content, or working. And do you know what that feels like to really notice those moments where the mind is feeling really present in daily life? One of the few of the places I notice it is reading. Sometimes really engrossed in a book, I could be like, wow, the mind is like very quiet. Or even watching TV, if it's a good show, movie, whatever it is, to be absorbed in that in a way. This is one thing I've been working on myself, is trying to not do the 2-screen thing where I'm like on my phone and trying to watch something at the same time. Notice how less satisfying it is for me to do that. Like, I don't even know I'm doing this. It's just like pure habit. So noticing what that might be for you, and when those moments come up, and giving yourself a moment for the mind and for the nervous system to take that space in. Because I think at a time when there's so many things to get distressed about, allowing the mind to notice those moments of peace is really important. And I would encourage to not let anyone take that away from you. Not in a possessive or a grasping way, but just remembering. Again, this Pali word sati just means to remember. So giving yourself that gift of having those moments. And the Buddha taught that this capacity for peace is the highest happiness in this life. Okay, so the third foundation, the mind. We talked about it last week, this week. First foundation, body. Second foundation, feeling tone. Third foundation, mind. And insight, noticing the three marks: impermanence, constantly changing, no permanent self, anatta, and the unsatisfying nature of trying to grasp onto things. And then noticing when the mind is caught in grasping or aversion, noticing when it's not, noticing that space, and then making this a part of daily life practice at work and relationships, so that this kind of liberative capacity of the practice can really infuse life. I wanted to end with a quote by Sokni Rinpoche, another Tibetan master, living one. He said, "Keep looking until you realize within your own experience that you are so much more than you believe you are. Keep looking until you discover the wondrous heart, the marvelous mind that is the basis of your being."